But all right, guys. So Amanda and Jess, thanks so much for coming on this webinar with us. It's really awesome to have you all on. I hope you guys are doing well. Can you just each give me a quick little introduction of where you're from and what the last couple tours you did were? Jess, you want to start?
Sure. So I'm originally from New Hampshire, but I live in LA now. So that's where I am on this sunny day. Last couple of tours, well, I spent most of last year touring with Amanda doing Ella Mai. And then I was about to play the first Pussy Riot show this year when literally the whole world shut down. So the tour that didn't happen. But production rehearsals were really fun. Toured with Tessa Violet towards the end of last year. Joan Osborne, a band called Chloe from Australia, and a couple other random things, and do some work at the Palladium, thanks to Megan. Cool. And yeah, that's been the most recent stuff.
Awesome. Amanda, do you want to tell us where you're from and what you've been doing?
I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee. It's where I am now. I came home when, like, the day the governor of California announced the stay-at-home order, I got a ticket home.
She's like, I'm out.
I'm gonna go home so I can be closer to my family. So I've been here for 2 months, but it's been cool. It's been a good. I hate that everything what's going on and how it is turning out, and people are sick and losing their lives. But I have enjoyed having this time with my parents and family and things. Like Jess said, most of last year was with Ella, touring with Jess, which was great. Actually, it was great working with Jess. That was our first time. We have been trying to work together for a couple years, and it just never kind of happened. But last year happened. It's been great. I love having Jess as on the other end of the snake. I don't know what I'm gonna do with anyone else. But yeah, last year I went back and forth between Ella and Janelle for the most part. It was like literally some off days from Ella, I went and did Janelle's show, and then vice versa. And then Coachella happened, and they were on the same day, same sound check time.
Crazy.
That was the thing. So I was pretty busy last year, so I'm kind of happy for this break. I didn't want it to be this long, but I did need a break. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
I have talked to a lot of engineers who are like really like touring engineers who are super busy and be like, yes, it's all very bad, but having some time to reevaluate, or not reevaluate, right, but like take time to myself and just kind of like get brain space and get off the road for a minute it's healthy to mentally get away from it for a minute, even though it's not bad circumstances. But in any case, yeah, hearing you guys talk about like working together and smiling, like I love audio teams when they like really work well together. Like there are a couple people I really love working with, and it's always just makes touring and working so much more fun when you have someone else that you're like partnered with, and then you know what they're going to do, and your communication gets worked out. And I mean, it's cool that you guys get to do that together. So, and I would love to start talking through your Ella Mai setup. She's like super talented singer, and she's young, so I think she probably comes from a generation of artists who like are using a lot of probably pre-recorded tracks and stuff. And I was watching one video of her where there's like mostly just keyboards on stage, but I don't know. I'm just curious about how the whole setup is put together, from like what the instruments on stage are controlling all the way to managing the playback, and then kind of how you guys both treat tracks, mixing both monitors and front of house. So Jess, you want to kind of talk through how you divided the workload with Ella Mai and kind of what the playback setup was like?
Well, the playback, so the playback was interesting in that it wasn't a playback operator like on the side of the stage. A lot of the times with the bigger bands, that's what you'll have. You'll have somebody dedicated and they're doing all the track launching and everything like that, A rig, B rig. But instead, the MD, who was also our bass player, Jamal, would control all of that, and also play the bass at the same time. Super talented guy. So it was a different situation because the the laptops and everything were actually on stage, which is a little nerve-wracking sometimes, because you don't have control, the ability to jump in and bail it out if something goes wrong. But Jamal and I would work together to understand how things are working and what to do in case something goes down. So that's where Playback was, and we pretty much had the same setup the whole year with we had 3 risers. We had a backline tech that would set everything up and take care of that side of things. So it was drums, bass, and keys. And there was Moog, like synth bass, and actual electric bass. And then the keyboards are changing all the time. There are a varied amount of keyboards, and that's a whole other topic of leveling. Amanda, you wanna add anything there?
Yeah, that was it. It was a 3-piece band: keys, drums, and bass, and key bass. Yeah, for the most part, it was for our keyboard player at 4 keyboards.
Yeah, it was like between 3 and 4.
It was 3 and 4, depending on, for tour, it was 4. And then we had to jump through festivals, depending on whether backline could provide it or not. It'll go between 3 and 4.
And 2 BGB as well.
Yeah, and 2 background vocalists.
Were the keyboards actually were they actually making the sounds themselves, or were they like MIDI keyboards controlling controlling the keyboard?
Yeah, no, he was playing using the sounds from the keyboards.
Yep.
And it was really with the track and band balance, they were playing live. So the tracks were kind of enhancement type things. And things that kind of make the record that you can't replicate via any instruments. A lot of those sounds were in Playback and things like that, but they were definitely playing, and keyboard, he was definitely playing like piano. Like for instance, Boot Up starts off with just piano and definitely him playing live. There was no track or anything. So the tracks just kind of help beef up things and give us the effects and drum tracks that were, specific to certain sounds.
Yeah, it's really go ahead.
Was there a live drummer too, or?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So he was playing the snaps and everything on the SPDS.
Yeah, exactly.
So how many tracks were kind of going all together? Were you guys getting stems, different submixes of different stuff, or how many channels of Playback were you dealing with altogether?
Was it 8?
I think it was 8. Yeah, I think it was. Maybe it was. It could have been 10. No, it was 8. It was definitely 8. Yeah, because we had that DI thing. Yeah, so it was 8. So it was what? It was like
drums, stereo music. It was some key stuff and BGVs. 2, 4, 6.
Yeah. And then there was, of course, there's like Click and Slate, and the singers had different slates than the band as well. So that was the 7th and 8th channel essentially is that's their kind of their custom deal because they have lots of count-ins.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost exactly how a lot of bands I've done Playback with have been exactly the same. We're trying to take 4 stereo stems and then 2 slates and a click. It's I feel like that's a pretty common way to do it. You feel like you get enough there to work with, usually.
Right. I usually don't like to submix stuff.
Same.
I want to have as much control as I can have. So when I started with Janelle, we used to submix keyboards and stuff, and after that, I'm like, I need control, and I'll just get a bigger, console, a stage rack if I need more channels. But I try to stay away from submixing things.
Yeah, how many channels on Janelle do you use all together?
We're at
with Playback.
With Playback, I think we're at 10. with Janelle. It's not that many more. It's basically the same stuff. Just we add strings and horns and stuff to the playback on Janelle, but everything else is basically the same.
Hey, so yeah, Jess, what's your preferred? Sorry to jump in. What's your preferred like a playback system? What did you use? Ableton or Pro Tools or
Ableton. Yeah, Ableton for sure. Ableton with, if it's like, I mean, it depends on the budget and the focus of the artist, right? Like if a band is more of a band and they're not super playback focused, then they might not want to throw a ton of money into like a bunch of RME fire faces and pump out, 32 channels of playback. But if you're a band like the Glitch Mob, like I worked with them and that's exactly what they did. They had 48 channels of MADI and everything, but that's because that's their whole show. Like they don't have any acoustic instruments at all. So that was 48 channels of MADI, just directly into the desks and different failovers and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think what I see is the standard, Play Audio 12 setup. Like everything kind of changed once those devices came on the market, because it used to be the SW8, like you would use a couple Motu ultralights and have 8 channels out. Well, I think they have more than 8 channels out, but the SW8, only provides an interface for 8 at a time. So maybe you have 8, maybe you have 16, but you can totally go nuts and plug a bunch of fire faces into each other and have 48. And you could probably get away with 96 channels if you really wanted to, but a lot of bands just don't, go that deep into it. I think where you find that is definitely more on like the electronic side, where there's a lot of maybe like live synthesis happening and live like MIDI, OSC stuff going on, where you do see those big like drum rigs like Disclosure, where every pad is, changing every 30 seconds to some new sound or something like that. But yeah, the most common is definitely the Play Audio 12. And Ableton is certainly, for me, preferred. I know every engineer like has, what they like, but I like to use Ableton just because I like its reliability. And then I also like the way that it handles MIDI, and you can do stuff with Max, and then like the setlist plugin. Like there's just a few like extras there that I really enjoy. But I'm sure anybody can we could argue about it all day.
I definitely like see Ableton more than anything else at like at like for dedicated playbacks people, at playback engineers, playback techs who are working mostly in touring and stuff. I almost always just see Ableton.
Yeah.
And it just
I've
seems
seen
like
Pro Tools a couple times, and
Me too.
I think that's more so probably because things are being recorded a lot and you got to make edits and all this stuff, and just handling audio is easier in Pro Tools. So it just becomes the playback, DAW of choice, just because of how much they have to do as far as recording and editing and stuff. But from my experience, the Ableton just seems better as far as firing off and what you can, all the things that you can add to it.
Interesting. Want to answer this question from Liam. Has anyone used the, I don't know what, the Cymatic units? Have you guys heard of this?
I don't think so.
No. So Liam, yeah, I'm not really quite sure of what those are. But yeah, I feel like I tend to see musicians who become playback technicians, who are kind of get that job in a tour. They tend to use Ableton more, because I think like Ableton feels like it's more almost like musician friendly, like the way you can organize things and sequence things. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that. I don't know Ableton that well, but then like people who are kind of come from like recording backgrounds and stuff tend to use like Pro Tools.
Right.
At least from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think that's somewhat accurate, and I think also kind of speaking to Amanda's point, like if people are coming at it, usually when I see Pro Tools show up, it's when maybe the record's not out yet, or there's a lot, like there's a lot of stuff going on, and they need to be using the actual sessions from the studio. They don't have time to bounce out stems and then bounce out stems and then bounce out stems. Like Amanda and I would spend for at least like half a day, if not more, like at the beginning of every tour, you know, or if another song was added or an arrangement was changed, just sitting there like leveling out all the tracks so that we knew that we would be getting predictable levels of things both within a song and like the balance of instruments to one another, but then also from song to song, because you know, you get stems from one producer and it's at this volume, you get stems from this producer and it's like super quiet, and then this is super hot. It's like, whoa, what's going on? So we'd spend a lot of time doing that. So if you don't necessarily have that time, but you know that you've got your stuff mixed, like for whatever the record is, it's already in a Pro Tools session. I've seen people kind of like steer more towards Pro Tools that way because that it makes sense. Like if you're on a time crunch, you're just doing like a quick debut show somewhere. That makes sense. Like musicality, I do think is a big thing in playback, because especially like if it's the situation where, you know, you're the operator, you know, that's why it made sense to me for an MD to be controlling it, because they kind of know the flow of the show and how to read, you know, the cues from other musicians, and then to be able to take what's happening and then translate it, you know, over some talkbacks and stuff like that if they wanted to do something a little bit different. Like, yeah, Ableton's definitely, it's definitely good, and so is playback. Like it's a good position for someone with a little bit more like musical inclination, but it's also like this highly technical position where you really need to understand how memory management and things like that are working on a computer and within the program itself, or you can get yourself into trouble really fast.
Yeah, that's a great thought, you know. And
Yeah.
you know, and some like the real like the good playback technicians I know, they are like super geeks with all like a lot of like MIDI and like no really understanding MIDI and all that, because yeah, like usually you have to be agile with it. You have to it has to be musical. It has to like flow with the rest of the set. And I've seen a lot of even dedicated playback technicians not even starting the playback stuff themselves, but then handing the trigger to someone on the MD on stage, who will trigger the start of the song. And then so yeah, it's but it's crazy that it is such like a core of so many shows these days. You know, like if that stuff goes down and you're not able to kind of get it back up, it can sink a lot of shows. Even just, you know,
Yeah, we sank.
Yeah, so tell me some stories. Come on.
No.
It was only one show that I remember that everything just kind of went to the bottom of the ocean.
Where were you?
LA of all places.
At the Novo.
It was like the LA show. You know, for everybody, LA is like the show, which I understand. But for me, every show is important. So I don't care that I'm in LA. I just need the show to go right. But I get why, you know, LA is a big market, whatever. But we had a couple guests and some things were requested and something was rearranged in playback. And I don't know what went wrong. It just started.
Trying to remember.
Like the second song was boot up. That can't be the second song of the show. Like it's the single. Everything, the order of the show was all out of whack. It just was horrible. And Ella handled it well. She did. She was a great
Truly.
trooper, but it was the absolute worst. I wanted to just say, LA will be back. Like, we can't do this show tonight. But Ableton just, it went haywire because of an edit that was made. And I don't know if, you know, things weren't double checked, quadruple checked, you know, like it just, the whole order of it was out of whack and it started playing. It sounded like just the wrong session. Like the levels were off, wrong songs were being played. It was just really bad.
Yeah, we're missing the drum tracks. I'm remembering this. I think I blocked a lot of it out remember.
Me too. That's
We were
what I
missing
like.
the drum
I can't remember.
We were missing the drum tracks.
Oh my god! It was
And
so
everybody's
bad.
like, everybody's all over, ears. Like, I'm just hearing it from like 8 different people. Like, there's no drum tracks, no drum tracks. Why are there no drum tracks? I'm trying to talk to the MD because the laptops aren't in front of me, so I can't look at it to figure it out. And then it was something about the like A rig versus B rig. Like, we had just started using a different playback device. And I think we just like that day taught me the importance of process. Not that I didn't know it before, but that day forward, we put a new process in place and stuck to it like absolutely, just like no, once we're done sound check, no edits, make whatever edits you want during sound check, fine, everybody signs off on it, cool, no edits between then and the show, like just never ever again. Because
yeah, I forgot we had
obviously
made that edit like right before the show.
Yeah.
Because a certain request was made, and we were like, okay, scrambling, trying to accommodate, and we just made that edit before the show.
Yeah,
that was just a bad call.
Yep. Process is very important with playback and versioning and all of this.
Yeah, and it's funny just talking to people about the stuff because the exact same thing happened to us on a Heim gig once. Like the playback, our playback technician Parker, who's like super talented and like really knows his stuff, but he went in there and they're like, well, we know we want to do this edit. It's like, well, sound check's done. Doesn't matter. Do the edit, and then something went wrong. It was like the wrong session. It's exactly what you're describing. Something happened, and the show was like, what's going on? And like had to stop the show. He had to load a whole different, they were talking on stage or something, but he had to load an old session just to kind of get it working again. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had an intermission built into the show anyway, and we just took it early to like, I was like, call it, because I'm a production manager too, so I'm out like trying to still kind of fix it by mixing the show, but also having to like troubleshoot as a production manager and figure out how to fix this problem and when to stop the show and all this stuff, trying to check in with Jess, and she's getting it from all the musicians on stage as well as management and all this stuff. So I honestly was trying not to get on talk back with Jess because I knew what she was dealing with, but I just was like, yo, tell Ella that we're gonna take intermission.
We're coming back.
It was literally like only 3 songs in, and we were like, nope, we gotta, but no, go. Yep. Let's figure this out, because this can't happen right now.
Yeah, and another time that there's like a huge playback issue. So I was not part of the team that built it, but this also speaks to like the best advice I can give is like, and this comes purely just from like engineering side of things. I would do the same thing. I'm also a software engineer, and so I would also do the exact same things. Like you wouldn't build an entire application in an environment that isn't going to be exactly the same as the one you're going to deploy it to. That doesn't make any sense. Like, what if it's 16 gigs less RAM on the server and it can't function, right? So you wouldn't do that. In the same way, I wouldn't ever like build playback sessions on the hardware that it's not going to be it's not going to be played from, right? So this happened to an artist at Coachella this year. My friend was working on it. She was mixing monitors, and something had happened where like the session was built on somebody else's computer that was like a lot more high octane, and then it was put onto, it was tested, everybody felt good about it, whatever, but then it was put onto a computer that was older and not as much RAM, like just couldn't handle it, and then it wasn't tested before the show, and during the show they had crazy dropouts and like all of these issues, and it was like bad. And so so my friend called me and I said, okay, well, give me all the equipment in the sessions. And I opened it up, and like in 5 minutes, I knew exactly what the problem was. It's like, okay, guys, like this is gonna be, you know, a $5,000 problem to fix, but then you're not gonna ever have this problem again. Like, you gotta buy the right laptops, get the right hardware, and then, you know, fix it up. And then we did have a successful second weekend at Coachella, so saved it. But like, yeah, you always, like, predictability is just key with playback, really.
Yeah, talking about process, testing, you know, just gotta make sure it all works. And if you're don't make changes once you get it going, because consistency is key, right? You just want it to work and work the same all the time.
Just want it to work.
But so, like, I want to discuss, like, maybe like talking about process to get prepared. The process, how important it is to get the tracks sounding good before they're actually coming out into our consoles. Obviously, we're talking about different bands having different budgets. Luckily, like a lot of the bands we get to mix, you know, might have some budgets for like pre-production where we can go and like sit and pre-mix some of this stuff, listen through the sections and getting it pre-mixed. But like, I've always found that the more time we get to spend on it, the better it ends up being, you know, paying attention to detail first, having to try to fix details later in the mix. But Amanda, can you talk about what kind of things you might be looking out for when you're trying to get tracks ready to go for a tour? Different levels?
Well, like I just said earlier, just balance. I do try to first keep the integrity of the record that was put out, and I tend to not EQ a lot on my tracks, depending on if they're mixed well, if what I'm getting sounds proper or not, because the producer and the person who mixed it for the record, that was the point, you know, like, I don't want to mess with that. Now I want to make sure it translates in a live setting. So I do want to balance it out as far as volume and some effect things that I want to kind of pan and to make my mix full. But I don't EQ a lot on my tracks because I just want to maintain the integrity of what the producers and the artists and the mix engineer who mixed the record wanted to give the people. But I do take time to level them out with my monitor engineer, whoever they may be. Like Jess said, we spent a lot of time in rehearsals, just me, her, and Jamal going through every song, playing and leveling out. So I would say we take the major single of the artist, and you use that as a proxy, because 9 times out of 10, that's probably a little higher in level than everything else. So you use that as a proxy, and you just go through every song and make sure every track is hitting at the same level, so you won't be chasing the entire time, and you're able to mix. As far as, from my perspective, as front of house, I don't want to chase tracks the entire show. I want to be able to be creative and mix. So I want to make sure everything is balanced out. And if I want to do some panning, that is when I'll decide when I want to pan things and when not, depending on some creative stuff that I want to do as a mixer. What else?
Do you have like general panning things you do? I actually get this question all the time. People are always asking about live sound, you know, tend to traditionally keep like mono things down the middle and live sounds. You can get even coverage, but what's your approach with tracks? Do you try to keep things like stereo true to the record, or do you try to keep things more in the center, or?
Yeah, if I have drums and a bass track, I usually keep them center. And if say like a bass track and they're sending me stereo, I don't want a stereo bass track. Just send me mono. And sometimes I put the S1 stereo imager on my background vocals, my track background vocals, so that if I have live background vocals, they can sit where they need to in the mix. So I spread the track BGVs a bit. And sometimes I spread my track keys, especially if I have a live keyboard player too. So especially in the Ella situation, like he's really playing and going forward, and our like it's anchored. So I don't try to spread maybe my piano sound. There's always usually the foundation of the song. But say his like pads and stuff, I'll spread them. I'll pan my live pads more so than my track pads, because of even looking at the stage. If my keyboard player is stage left, then I'm gonna move that. I'm gonna pan that a bit, just so when you're looking at it and things are going on, you're hearing what you're seeing. Right. Also with my live drums, my toms, like I pan it engineer perspective and things like that. So when he's doing a roll, he's going like this, but you're hearing this way. That it kind of throws you off whatever. So I like to play with pans. When I was doing Tegan and Sarah, I would mess with the ping pong delay on certain songs. Like I would just let it like swirl around and stuff. I really like to play with pans.
Cool. Jess, how about you when you're mixing? I guess IEMs is different, but like if you're doing front of house stuff, what's your panning approach?
Well, I use it in monitors as well, because it'll help make room for things, and it's just the same as front of house, really. You know, like the drums, except maybe it's backwards, right? Because for the drums, like I want the drummer to feel like the drums are in their position. So it's not engineer perspective, it's drummer perspective. So, but other things, you know, just to be able to sneak, especially around the tracks, especially like pads and things like that, were always kind of the difficult things to negotiate, because, you know, singers need to hear themselves pop through. Bassist wants things to sound different, you know, like everybody needs their own personal mix. And so I will use that I'll use panning to try and sneak some extra intelligibility into the mix, or to get things out of the way. And very, very similar to what Amanda said. For front of house, I do like to use imagers. I try to avoid using compression to do mix depth unless I have to. With tracks, it's a little bit easier, but like with live instruments, you know, I don't necessarily want to rely on that too much. So sometimes I will use an imager, but even that kind of has, you know, it's a gentle thing, I suppose. It's a nuanced thing, not gentle. But yeah, I love messing with delay as well. Like ping pong delay is super fun. Back when I was touring with Elohim, that was definitely my favorite thing, was doing all of her vocal effects and just catching, you know, I'll do my delays on on, you know, obviously on a send, but with the extra step where I'll dedicate a fader to how much I'm sending of the track, so that I'm not sitting there trying to use like a little knob or something. And that way I can just clip the end of a word and get that. And so I leave my delay like fully up, tap tempo obviously, and then that way I'm sort of like mixing into it, throwing it a little bit and letting it decide, letting that fader decide what's passing and what's not, rather than bringing up like an existing delay, so I don't get that rollover of the whole vocal that just came before it. And yeah, messing with like ping pong on that, you know, like things like that, telephone the delay a little bit, just to keep it separate from the main vocal, stuff like that. That was always like the super fun part of working with her, because she was just like there for it. Same thing with Chloe, like they were totally there, just like, yep, whatever vocal effects you want to do, totally cool, do it. It's fun.
That's awesome when you kind of have that, like, you know, the freedom to play around.
Yeah.
And like as far as getting the effects on the faders, I think that's amazing, because like, you know, it's a live sound workflow thing in the studio. You know, you like insert an effect on something or whatever, and like change the mix, whatever. Live sound, we must want fast, right? We want to be cool. Right. So I think like putting stuff on the faders like that is super cool. Like, because you just have immediate access. So you can just be like, yeah, that's awesome. So one thing I do on tracks, I don't know if you guys use any like kind of compression or multiband compression on tracks, but like I always find myself, since sometimes in the studio, like some like high bright stuff kind of pops out, I'll use like a multiband compressor and just kind of like, or dynamic EQ, just like keep the high stuff like kind of limited, not jumping out. Do you guys ever do anything like that? Like using compression on tracks to keep stuff out, or
Yeah, sometimes on like the spacey key stuff, you have to kind of watch it so it doesn't just kind of jab out at you, because maybe on the recording that was, you know, the high point of the song or climax or transition or something, and they just sent it to you for the show, and it's like it doesn't really translate the same live, because it's a different arrangement, or you know, it's also being played by the keyboardist or something, because a lot of times it's stacking what's on the track the keyboard player is also playing, so you have to like create space for those things. And sometimes with the background vocals too on tracks, it's, you know, especially when the chorus hits, it's like bam in your face, and it's like, hold up, like I know it's the chorus. Let me like back it up a bit. So yeah, I use a lot of sometimes I use a lot of compression on it just depends on the song, not like across the board. If I don't have to compress it, then I'm not gonna use a compressor just because that's what you're supposed to do. You know, like I want to use the tools correctly and just give the natural form of the song.
Yeah, Christian just asked a good question to follow on with that, which I was just going to talk about, which is, are you using the sidechain feature of multiband compressors, dynamic EQ on tracks to make space for the vocals? Answer there, like, I'll answer from monitor perspective. Absolutely. You have to be very clever about how to make space for each vocalist in their own mix. So I'll have copies of everybody's mics, and I'll have copies of, for example, what did I copy on Ella? I think I had a copy of the keyboard. I don't remember which one it was. I think it was Kronos, the one that our keys player was always using to play like the intros and any of the more exposed things. I had a copy of that was sidechained in certain frequencies to the lead vocalist's vocal, so that it was right there when she needed it, but then when she needed to hear herself, she could hear herself. And it's a very small amount, you know, I'm not talking 12 dB or something crazy, but you know, just a little bit to pull it out of the way and pull it out of the focus, so that, you know, when it needs to be there, it's there, and when it's not taking over. I did that as well with some of the tracks, kind of, you know, the same way, like Amanda, you're saying, like the BGVs will come in, the track BGVs will come in super hot, and it's like, whoa. And I think a lot of it just comes from when you do the show so many times, like you realize, oh, I could kind of automate that if I just do it like this. So you do it that way. Another tool, not a compressor, but an expander, the PSE, I think it is, Waves. Amazingly helpful tool for, at least for monitors. I haven't done that related to, but for monitors, like that changed entirely, because there was a ton of crowd noise all the time. And because like our shows were mostly sold out, people are close to the stage, and you know, they're screaming and having a good time and whatever. And then our drummer is awesome, but he's a drummer, so it's going to be loud, you know, and you've got two singers, and then like the lead, and everybody's kind of right there in front of the drummers picking up all of this stuff. But once I was able to use the PSE, it's it's an expander, so it's like it's essentially the opposite of a compressor. Once the noise coming through, or the signal coming through, reaches a threshold, then it boosts the signal. So then that way, you know, and that I was aggressive with. It'd probably be down 10 or 12 dB depending on the microphone. The backing vocalist closer to the drummer, I was more aggressive with, because I had to be. But yeah, like super fast attacks that they're not feeling that happen, but it changed the game entirely. Like it hits that threshold, boom, they're up 10 dB. It's going into their whole, you know, vocal signal chain. They can hear themselves. Everybody's happy. As soon as they're done singing, it's back down 10 dB, so they're not getting killed by the cymbals.
That's
I don't
awesome.
really use multi-band on my vocalist. I'm not doing a show without the R compressor and the R Vox on on my lead vocal. And I just kind of hike up the output gain for my vocal. I had a teacher that told me not to engineer. So like people may see my output gain on my compressor and they're like, why? But it sounds good. So I don't really care, like my vocal is there. That's who these people came to see. That's who needs to be heard the most, so I'm going to do what I need to do to make space for it.
Yeah. I feel like getting the stage noise, the crowd noise, all that out of the vocal is kind of like number one most difficult thing that we have to deal with as live engineers, right? I've been using those primary source enhancers, those Neve 5045s. Those tend to work pretty well, vocal gates, but again, they're like, it's not perfect. Some singers it works well for, some singers it doesn't. Like I've seen a couple people use expanders like you're talking about. It's really a great way to do it. But man, it's like, I feel like any like pop music that we're doing or whatever, where the vocal's supposed to be out front, if you can like solve that problem, like the rest of the mix is like, you're like 80% of the way to a good mix,
Right.
If you get that solid sound in the ears, solid sound in the front, everything else is kind of going to be cool,
Yeah, totally.
Liam asked a question, what's the longest full trip latency you can live with, both for monitors and front of house? I think he means like whatever the most latency we could deal with on any one channel, or I'm not quite sure, Liam, if you want to talk in there, but
none.
Yeah.
Like obviously zero latency is the key, but I mean, I do use plugins sometimes, and sometimes like some of that processing in the console can, get up to, I don't know, 1 millisecond to, I mean, more than a couple milliseconds, you're starting to have problems.
Yeah.
And I
totally.
try not to use so many, like I use waves, but I only use dynamic plugins. Like I don't use EQs or anything else because I don't want to run into latency. And two, like I'm on a Digico and I trust the EQ on that. I don't want to add any more coloring to anything. I've done a lot of work and research on choosing my microphones and all this stuff. Like that's the point, to get the natural sound of the source. I don't want to color anything that I need to for that. I just want to take out, I use a lot of subtractive EQ and do what I need to do to get the natural source of what I have. And I just use it, I just compress it and try to level it off.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that's sort of related to this, and I don't think this is what your question is about, but when you are using something like Ableton on stage, typically, for like true playback only, there's no latency because you're not introducing, there's no input to output, right? But when you are using MIDI triggers and doing a bunch of other different stuff, if you have an SPD that's assigned to play a drum rack in Ableton, or somebody's using virtual synths or stuff like that, that's when latency starts to become an issue there. And like that, the maximum I can tolerate is, and most people I find, is 128 samples, whatever that boils down to. Going anywhere beyond that, it almost becomes unplayable because it's just too out of sync with things. But then now you're back in the computer power processing mess, and it's like, yeah, it's always an uphill battle with that.
Can someone out there in the chat tell us, do the conversion, find a conversion, tell us how many milliseconds is 128 samples? I'm curious because I don't know, it's using plugins, using all this different stuff, it's really like super helpful and it's like great tools, but latency is the killer with a lot of it,
yeah, and it's like you said, it's good tools. We have to like remember that we're playing live music, and that's the magic of it, that it's humanizing. It has its human error there to make you feel it. So you don't want to add all this other stuff to try to make it perfect or whatever, like you have a whole band on stage. Let them do what they're supposed to do. They're there to do a job, and you're there to do a job. Don't try to like make it anything else other than we're just here to play and listen to music.
Totally, it goes back to the idea that what we're doing is sound reinforcement, right?
Right.
We're and then also to the fact that if you start with a good sound source, if you work on that first, that's like the best way to do any kind of engineering, I guess. So yeah, if you put the work into getting the sounds good and making sure helping the people on stage feel comfortable enough that they're putting all this good stuff out, it makes our jobs much easier, just to kind of be simple and out of the way and,
right.
and give the audience what they need, so for sure. But yeah, it seems like we're 2.9 milliseconds there. Yeah, I think after 2 milliseconds, it starts to sound weird to me.
Yeah.
We were doing a lot of trying to do a lot of auto tune live with one of the bands I work for on television, doing television stuff. And first time we couldn't get the whatever system we were using. We were trying to do it on like Saturday Night Live, I think, and like couldn't get the delay down below like 2.5 milliseconds, and it was driving everyone crazy in the broadcast. Everyone's like, terrible. But the artist's like, I want auto-tune. But
yeah.
Jess was running auto-tune too. What's the best channel, like line of channel where it should go in the can't think of what I'm trying to say, in the channel strip? Like, where should it go if you're doing something on TV? Should it go directly out of the mic to the auto-tune, whatever? Like, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, so like the way that we're doing it, we always had our clean channel and then the affected channel. And you never want to mix the two together because that's going to sound super weird and it's not the point. But I didn't want auto-tune going to the artist's ears, because like some people like it and they work with it, but then some people aren't used to it and they'll actually adjust kind of the wrong way. So that's a separate discussion, but ideally I preferred what I came down to, and we tried like all different ways because we were running into that too. I actually ended up buying a new interface to help correct the problem. So the first thing to start with is you have to be using, you can't run it in a DAW and have, like Ableton or something like that, and have there be that round trip latency, because it's an expensive in terms of memory plugin, and you're probably not going to get away with 128 samples. And even if you do, you're still at, 2.7 milliseconds. And a vocalist is going to hear that, and everyone's going to hear that. So like you said, that was that problem, Scott. What I then eventually ended up doing was I got a UAD Apollo Twin standard now. Everybody's got them, and they have a feature called the Unison feature, which allows you to basically run, you choose like a plugin and you can run it zero latency. And then you can take the monitoring feed of that. So it's literally only going into the device and out of the device. You're saving that computer round trip, which eliminates a lot of the latency. So that I would take the direct output from that. Yeah, I would take the direct output from that, and that would be our tune channel. But I would go directly from the mic receiver itself. Yeah.
Yeah, you got all the processing right in the ESP right in these boxes. It's amazing. Like, I think when we were trying to do it initially, it was like 5 years ago or something. Maybe not. Some of this technology is so amazing. It's actually been inspiring me to like get back into studios. I used to own a recording studio, all analog.
Yeah.
Like now, kind of like it kind of sounds like that a little bit again.
Yeah.
But no, I actually getting auto-tune to work. The only time I've really been able to do it like live well is mixing Khalid last year, and this guy Jeremy, a friend of mine, like had the whole system going with one of these, and was like that show is all about him on stage, like one wireless mic. He's running around. That's all the band is even like way off stage. Like, but yeah, even with like kind of a soft singer and like a lot of like arena cheering and stuff, and he got it dialed in, and it sounded fantastic. It was like really, I mean, he was hitting all his notes every day. It sounded like, you know, and it didn't matter if he was or not, because like the auto-tune sounded awesome. So if you do want
those
to full pop on that sort of thing,
those devices are killer. I love them. Like, definitely a game changer.
Yeah.
Did you do a lot of ducking on that, or was it kind of like our setup? We had a clean and then a dry channel.
Yeah. So it was clean all into the monitor console. Let's see. How did we do? I was, you know, again, like, especially get like productions on that size, like, you know, there's like, I'm out front of house. I didn't even set foot on stage. Like, I did like 3 weeks of that tour. I did not touch a microphone. Like, even like on that side, so it's like, oh, like, let me help set up my front of house consoles. And no, we got people to do that. Like, so I don't know, but I don't know exactly how that patch was done. But I think it was all post preamp. I think the split was like after the pre and the, maybe we even had like an external preamp. It was split right after that.
Yeah.
Okay. But we were definitely getting a straight vocal line, totally independent of the auto tune, because did not want to rely on us on something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You got to have that mic still. Let's see. Heather asked a question a while ago, and I kind of want to, you know, it's a good question. Advice for people just getting started to learn with music production software and hardware. I think she might be talking about recording. Heather, if you're still there, maybe you can clarify. But I mean, I think do you think Ableton's a good place to start if people are trying to like learn how to implement some of this stuff in live shows?
I think like, okay, so Ableton, I've been giving a lot of like beginners Ableton lessons lately, so I'm really learning again how hard the learning curve is. It's an awesome program, and it's limitless, and you can find, you know, there's probably 12 different workflows to do anything that you're trying to do. And that in and of itself makes it a little challenging at first. I would say, like, it depends on what your near-term goal is. You know, if you're somebody who's coming in, you want to do live looping of, you know, vocals or your guitar or whatever. Yeah, Ableton's going to be a good option, but it's going to come with that learning curve. If you're just trying to like get your head around mixing and start from the very beginning, and, you know, maybe record a couple tracks of guitar and a vocal, figure out how to mix them together, you can start with GarageBand, honestly. You know, GarageBand is just like a very, 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 very basic Logic. And then if you want to, you know, continue down that more like mixing oriented path, you can get Logic for $200, and then you can still open your GarageBand files, no problem. You know, but it's a question of like, what's your goal going to be? If you see yourself playing keys and like controllers and more like MIDI oriented stuff, you know, take the plunge, jump in with Ableton. They have great tutorials on their website, and there are so many great YouTubers out there who, you know, provide tutorials and to any amount of depth. It's like it's crazy. But yeah, I think personally, I think it like depends on what your short term and far term goals are. But for mixing, I mean, I wouldn't overcomplicate it at first, you know, because you wanna like get your wheels moving rather than spinning. Amanda, what would you think?
Great answer.
Excellent advice.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I would say for mixing, for me, if you're trying to learn that aspect of things, Pro Tools for me would be what I recommend, just because it looks like more so of a console, or, you know, and just dealing with audio, it's so much easier in that program. Is just crazy easy. So if you're trying to mix, you don't have to worry about learning the software in order to get to what you're trying to do. You can just throw the audio in there and then get to mixing. And yeah, it depends on like, are you trying to work in a studio? Is that your goal, or live? Then, you know, that just makes a difference. If you're a studio person, then yeah, for sure Pro Tools, because you learn it's just an easy way to learn how to send buses, set up aux tracks, you know, all this stuff is just easier to me that I found than any other software.
Yeah, I think
But everything I just said.
Yeah, I think it's really good advice. Definitely, if you're interested in working as a studio engineer, Pro Tools is a must. But if you're not interested, like like there's a lot of cheaper, easier options that might have more like easily accessible tools for musicians and stuff. Yeah, definitely. Pro Tools is the industry studio standard, but it's also like really complicated how they manage their licensing, and they kind of can be a difficult company to interact with and all that Avid I'm talking about. So yeah, definitely good things and bad things about each platform for sure. And in that light, Alex did ask about Luna, which is the new Universal Audio DAW, known for its low latency. For sure, that could totally act as a option for doing playback live for sure. It acts just like Pro Tools does. It's a playback system, and certainly if you're wanting to run plugins like auto-tune plugins, and you have the Universal Audio interfaces that have the DSP outboard, like not running the processing for those plugins on the actual computer, and that'd be a good way to do it for sure.
Yeah, learning about DSP and processing stuff is important too. I still am a little slow on my knowledge of those things, but that is something you should probably educate yourself on too, because it makes a difference. If you have a computer or a software that takes a lot of CPU or DSP, like it's going to be a problem. So you want to make sure that you have the right hardware as well when you're trying to explore and think about the software that you're going to be using. Yeah,
true. So my opinion on Luna is that sure, it would be fine for playback. I'm always the hyper paranoid engineer, and I'm gonna let that thing be out for a little while before I'd ever consider doing it.
Absolutely.
Had a lot of fun with a Waves LV1 console a few years ago, and I don't want to go through that again. So, but automating the key changes, so you can do this a number of different ways. Some people, if you're like me, you're wearing like 8 hats at the same time, and you don't have time to do it this way. But some people will have a keyboard even, and you can sit there and like plunk out the actual chords, so that if you're using a bunch of like literally like funkier chords, you can have the exact notes available. Some people I know do it that way. But that's very manual. If you're working in arrangement view in Ableton, then you can automate, you can just have like a MIDI track with an envelope that will then talk to the plugin in the UAD config, and you can set the key there. So if you've got something that's like, I just need C minor, I don't need something super custom, and it's C minor for the whole song, you just tell it C minor via MIDI, and then it launches with the next thing. But that's only if you're using arrangement view, which I typically recommend, but it's not always able to do.
Yeah, like the slickest Ableton rigs I've seen kind of operate this way, where you have either keyboard or like a pad with a bunch of buttons, and it's like, hit this one, that's going to start the song, and then as the song starts, Ableton will give the key change, and it'll be automated through Ableton.
Yeah, exactly. And definitely like shout out to Setlist plugin, Strange Electronic, Henry Strange. Great tool to just simplify and allow you to change your set up whenever. You don't ever have to like cut and paste stuff in Ableton, so you can know that when you make changes like that. Like for Pussy Riot, I have not only vocal effects automation and automating the patch change on the singer's laptop on her instance of Ableton, doing some like sub stuff. I also have lights going. I also have Resolume being queued over RTP MIDI with like networked computers. If I had to copy or cut and paste that every time they wanted to change the set, I would probably just have a heart attack. So being able to use set list is like, you can just choose, you know, whatever, you add a locator, and every time you punch that play button, it's going to start from that locator, and it's going to send whatever messages you want to whatever you want. Like the possibilities are really endless when it gets there.
Yeah, that's cool. So Sam asked a question: as live engineers, what skills or advice do you wish you would have known before you started mixing larger live shows? Amanda, do you have any potential advice or skills that you maybe thought you wished you had?
I didn't know how to approach the larger rooms. With Janelle, she does everything from the corporate 100 cap to state arenas, and it just was like, I don't know. At first, I didn't know how to make the transition. But I found myself just going back to the fundamentals of signal flow. Gain structure matters. And I went to SAE, I went to school, and that curriculum was studio based. I thought I was going to be a studio engineer. So a lot of this stuff, I just jumped in and learned on the job. And my resolve came to gain structure. Like, that is the most important thing that I don't think a lot of people put emphasis on. They're always asking about what plugins are you using, all this stuff. You need to have good gain structure. That is what I wish someone would have told me before, like, just going there and mix, or, you know, choosing your console, whatever. That's important too. But pay attention to your gain structure. To just like dealing with the stress of it all. Like it's you kind of have someone's career in the palm of your hands, and you just have to be considerate of that, and know that it's not about you. You know, you can be creative and all this stuff, but you are presenting the live version of that artist's record. That's it. Do what you need to do to get the live version of that record to the audience. What else? Yeah, like mic placement and mic choices. They don't translate. Everything doesn't translate from studio to live either. Like, I started off in a church, and I was so excited to use the AKG 414 on my piano. Does not work. Don't use that unless you like, you know, you have the infrastructure for that to work. You know, like, it's a lot of trial and error. But one thing I will say that you have to pay attention to is your gain structure.
Yeah. Well, you know, Sam, I do have a course on all this audio fundamental stuff, the Essential Live Sound Training, but that's like, in this course, like, that's like the two things I talk about most. Like, this is what you need to know to get live sound: gain structure, and then like subtractive EQ. Don't use too much EQ.
Don't use too much EQ ever.
Maybe a tiniest bit. If like 99% of my moves are, you know, maybe I'll boost a little treble in the snare drum, snare top mic, maybe, I don't know, something like that. But definitely not any vocal mics or anything. And yeah, and then gain structure. You know, if you hit those two things, I mean, it's such a good fundamental spot to be able to carry on and do the rest of your show.
I would add one more thing, which is learn, no matter like if you're going to be on stage or out of front of house or whatever, do yourself a favor and learn about power.
Yes.
Even just a basic, you know, understanding electronics 101, like understand circuits, understand what, you know, all the different equations of what translates to what, you know, like figure out circuits so that you understand how to not overload them and shut your show down. It's also a huge safety concern. You know, it's every venue is going to have variables. It's going to introduce, like, you know, grounding issues. And that can take up a lot of really valuable time if you don't already have an idea. It's going to take up some time anyway sometimes, because you're going to get to a venue and the power is going to be super dirty, it's going to suck, and you're going to spend time trying to clean it up. But learn about power for sure.
Especially if you want to be a monitor engineer, because that's part of your setup.
Yeah.
Yep.
And especially if you want to grow in your career, move past being an engineer, if you want to be a production manager or something, you are responsible for securing the power that you need. And then if you go over to Europe, it's totally different. So you just have to be knowledgeable and or hire someone like Jess. I get to a point where I don't know, like, oh, Jess will take care of it.
I've been there before, man. It's like, oh man, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that today.
Right.
Yeah, there's been some days.
The Production Academy, we will have a show power, entertainment power course at some point in the hopefully near future. Stay tuned for more.
Nice.
We'll take another question here from @Bunny on the board. Do you use assistants or interns in live mixing, and what do you look for in a potential assistant? It's kind of difficult because when we're working for an artist who has a very specific amount of space, and if you're doing sound checks, sometimes it's like personal for the artist. You don't want to have extra people. There are a lot of concerns, but that being said, there are some opportunities. And do you guys have any thoughts on this?
Well, usually, like Sam said, there's usually a space and budget thing, where it's like everybody on the tour actually has a job. So we can't just have someone out there interning or whatever, because it's just, you just can't have extra people on tour. It becomes like a thing, unless then you have to pay them, because it just doesn't make sense. But I did start a program 2 years ago on Janelle, where I started bringing in, I started with a group of girls, like 4 to 7 girls, and just have them come in. I okayed it. First, I had to okay it with Janelle. You have to do that. Like Scott said, sound check is their time. And it gets a little personal, and you can't have people recording and all this stuff, but you have to clear it with your artists. But of course, Janelle was cool and let the girls come in, and they just kind of stayed with me the whole time, sound check. And then I kind of brought that over into Ella too. One reason I brought it over to the Ella tour, because we just needed some help. So like, Jess, you cool? Yes, okay. So we'll bring 1 or 2 girls in, and the whole day meet us at load in. And there were a couple times where, if you were late, I didn't let them come, because that's part of it. You gotta be on time. And they would just load in with us. I put them to work, I assign them, and Jess will give them an assignment, and they'll just help us out. And it's a great learning process.
Yeah, it was super helpful, to be able to have some extra helping hands. But it's also cool just to like give that experience, like a full show day, because I think a lot of people think about oh, it'd be so cool to mix something, live, that'd be great, but they're not thinking about a 10 a.m. load in and a 12:30 a.m. get out, and like everything in between, and how meticulous the whole process is and everything like that. So I know I enjoyed when we had people along. That was really cool. And sometimes they love it, and they're like, oh, this, like, I had no idea it was all of this. This is super cool. So it's cool to help people like get excited about it.
I guess that's one thing I wish someone would have told me too before touring. Like, is the day you have is
the 2 days in one.
The mixing part of it is the least part of your day. For me, the mixing part of it is my relief of the day.
Truly, yeah.
Like, you have a 15 to 18 hour day.
Yes, ma'am.
Be prepared for that. If you plan on going to tour, like, it's not just about mixing. Like, yeah, you need to have the tools, you need to learn and have the talent, but like, you need to be able to be a person that can endure a 15 to 18 hour day, and you're literally working all day. Yeah, you eat, and sometimes Jess and I did not. We didn't eat, or we had to sneak away and eat, or you take shifts in eating, or you eat on stage. That's just a part of it, and yeah, nobody told me that.
Right.
It's such a unique lifestyle, this line of work, and it really suits some people so well. I don't know, like when I see people like understand what like the job looks like, and they're like, yeah, I'm in, I want to do that. It's like, cool. Like, let's go.
Right.
You know, like,
yeah, it takes a special person.
It does. But and some people think they might be into it and then realize like, oh, I don't want to be traveling that much or whatever, it's but that's why this is great to get together and talk about this stuff, and hopefully exposes some of that to people who might be thinking about it. So it's been awesome having you guys on. I really, really appreciate you guys coming by and sharing all your expertise and experience with us. So
Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. It's been fun.
Yeah. If is there anything else you guys want to share? Any last questions really quickly, guys? Gail. Oh, all right. Gail says, I'm a Black female in the UK and worked a few events and festivals, and I've not come across any sound engineers or monitor engineers at all. Are you talking about other female engineers, people of color? It's
Jess, is Sound Girls in the UK yet? I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sound Girls is like just everywhere. I know that there are meetups in the UK. I see that for sure.
Gail, look into soundgirls.org.
Soundgirls.org they do amazing work. They've really been supportive of me, honestly, helping the Production Academy get the word out on education stuff. Just great organization.
Oh yeah, Willow just said there's a chapter in London.
Yeah.
Yeah, there aren't any, Gail, I haven't ran across too many Black women either. Every time I see one, it's like, but there come out Z over at 8th Day. She's making her way up the ladder. Very cool and knowledgeable girl. There's Fayla Davis that I met through Sound Girls in New York, but she's more on the studio side. But yeah, we're far and few between, but we're here.
Yeah, and hopefully more conversation leads to more diversity. I don't know. Certainly working on it and talking about it, and hopefully only open discussions is just going to help. So all right, thank you guys. Appreciate you coming on. Sorry we went a little over here, but really did appreciate your time.
Totally cool. Yeah.
And to everybody, next week we're not doing this. There's the Live Sound Summit. I don't know if you guys know about this. My friend Nathan puts it together. It's a huge number of panelists, from Dave Ratt to Pooch Van Druten, all these like big sound engineers and engineers from PA companies talking about geeky system engineering stuff. It's a 4-day event, so that's happening next week. So we will not be having the webinar then, but hopefully you guys should check that out and come join us there if you'd like. But again, thanks guys, and hopefully see you when we can start getting some shows going again soon.
Yes, hopefully.
Heck yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody, and we'll see you soon. Bye.